Well, it's Tuesday. It's Tuesday again.
Yes.
And we're continuing with something that we started last time when we've been talking about scales and gauges, and we're really trying to make this clear and easy to understand. Because when we've approached the subject in the past, we've managed to confuse people.
Right.
So when last we met, we talked about gauge of full-size railroads.
Right.
And moreover, gauge is just simply a function of the distance between the rails. So it really doesn't have anything to do with models or full-size, other than the fact we said that 4 feet 8 1/2 inches got codified as standard gauge for full-size railroads. Beyond that, it's just the gauge of the railroad. Might be 9 millimeters, might be 3 feet, might be 5 feet, might be any number of different things. Well, just like the real railroads wanted to standardize to 4 feet 8 1/2 inches, so the people who were building models of railroads wanted to create some standardized gauges as well.
Right.
So that they could also have compatibility between their different pieces of equipment. So they said, we're going to create 11 standard gauges to build models on. And they numbered them, starting at the number 0 and ending with the number 10.
Right.
It was the Society of Model Engineers in 1899 in Great Britain who said these will be the standard railroad gauges for building model railroads, starting with 0 gauge at 1 1/4 inches.
Okay.
Number 1 gauge at 1 3/4 inches. Number 2 gauge at 2 inches. Number 3 gauge at 2 1/2 inches. Number 4 gauge at 3 inches, and so on and so on and so on.
Okay, that makes sense.
And actually, in reality, only a couple of these gauges really caught on as being very popular. 0 gauge at 1 1/4 inches was incredibly popular.
Right.
1 gauge at 1 3/4 inches was very, very popular. 5 gauge at 5 inches for people who wanted to build something just big enough to ride on.
Those are fun.
And so on. But these gauges kind of took off. Other gauges, like the number 2 gauge at 2 inches, not so much. They were, yes, people did that, but just not so much.
Not so much.
And of the ones, 0 gauge is the one that really became popular at 1 1/4 inches.
Right.
And it's still one of the most popular gauges, only people thought that the 0 was actually the letter O. Oh.
Got it. Yeah.
O gauge.
O gauge.
1 1/4 inches. And so you'll hear all kinds of people saying they have an O gauge railroad.
Okay. Instead of 0 gauge.
Instead of 0 gauge, and say O. It's the
sounds
same.
better.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. I have a 0 gauge. That sounds like
A 0
negative.
gauge. Yeah.
O sounds better.
O sounds better. And it also started a weird tradition as new gauges came along. People thought, let's name those after letters instead of numbers.
There you go.
And so the British came out promptly with a smaller gauge that was about half the size of O. And using the standard machinist nomenclature, they said, well, if 0 is if naught, 0 is 1 1/4 inches, then the next size down from that should be double naught. Double naught, or OO.
OO.
And to this day, in Great Britain, they model a lot of OO, which is very similar to American HO, which stands for half O.
There you go.
But these are just very standardized gauges of track. N, which stands for 9 millimeters. 9 millimeters between the rails.
Okay.
But all we're talking about still to this very moment is gauge. Not scale, because clearly the trains get bigger and smaller and smaller and bigger. And so there's going to be a relationship between the scale and the gauge. But for the moment, we're just talking about standardized gauges.
Right.
Just like with the full-size railroads. 4 feet 8.5 is standard full-size railroad. 1 3/4 inches is standard number 1 gauge.
There you go.
1 1/4 inches is 0 or O gauge. 5 is 5 inches for 5-inch gauge.
Got it.
Got it? Not terribly confusing, except for the fact that to this day, some of these gauges have sort of fallen off the radar.
And that's when it goes, uh-oh.
It's fallen off the gauge. Uh-oh. So as always, some of these scale and gauge combinations have become popular. Some of them have become less so. But for the moment, all we're going to concern ourselves with, and we'll revisit scale in another show. We're still trying to keep it really straightforward.
Yes.
Really simple. When it comes to models, there is also model gauge.
Yes.
And that's just the distance between the rails, irrespective of the scale. Okay?
Right, there you go.
Are we ready for the quiz?
Yes.
Okay, there won't be a quiz.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh! Ho! Oh! Ho! See, that's why Santa Claus brought you trains.
It was because I seriously thought that's what it was the H-O was the ho-ho train.
Ho, ho! Yeah.
The Christmas train.
And then when the kid got up in the morning, he went, oh! And the parents said, no, H-O, ho, ho!
Yeah.
TT, well, that's a subject for another day.
Yes, exactly.
But yet another one of these
Yeah.
gauges.
Right. Just don't get the NO scale or you'll, yeah.
Yeah, no.
Everybody's confused.
There
now.
is no gauge called NO, which
That's
is
right.
probably a good thing.
Yes. Unless your parents are strict like mine. We
Yeah.
didn't have space
No.
for a train.
Can I have a train?
No. Well, they said yes, but I'd have to figure out where to put
You'd
it.
have to figure out where to put it. Down in the cellar,
Yeah.
under the
bed, something like
between
that.
in the
Yeah.
crawl space. You can,
Someplace,
yeah. Put it there.
We just ran around the yard. I actually made a train out of my tricycle and my wagon.
Did the same.
It
Did
worked
the
just
same.
fine. Yeah.
I wanted a ride on railroad, so I just went around and dug a pathway and
Yeah.
put my wagon on it and said, "There's my railroad."
There's your
right
railroad.
there.
Those are
I
the
now
how
have
many
a
of you guys
ride on
did
ra-
that?
Yeah.
Boy,
it's
we're
just-
digressing all over the place.
boy, are we? And what
Yeah.
was the gauge of that? That would have been about a
Whatever you wanted.
12-inch gauge, which is a number 8, as I recall,
Yeah.
something like that.
I don't know. Mine had 3 wheels. So it
3
didn't
wheels,
count.
yeah, it doesn't count.
Doesn't count.
Well, if you haven't been over to the channel, please pop over to the channel. If you're not a subscriber to this lunacy,
Yes.
you want to become a subscriber
Yeah.
to the lunacy, and the easy way to subscribe is the blue button. Are we ready? Boing! Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you here on Sunday.
Right.
With some Sunday foolishness.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.